You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we're talking with Bobby Ochs, Restaurateur to the stars. And now, here's Arthur.
Hello, world, and hello, Bobby, and hello, guys.
Hey, hello to you.
So we have Bobby Ochs, OCHS, who has written a book, who happens to be one of the great restaurateurs of this country for quite some time. And the book that Bobby wrote is titled Bobby Ochs, OCHS, Kid from the Bronx and Restaurant Partner to the Stars, with a subtitle, From Kashavanishkas to Caviar to Humble Pie. Great titles. I've read the book. It is a great book, real fun. And to start, Bobby, let's do a little backstory. And before you got to be Restaurant Partner to the Stars, tell us about the Kid from the Bronx.
I was actually born in Brooklyn, although my parents were living in the Bronx when my mother was pregnant. This was in 1942, and my oldest cousin was a doctor, and he practiced in a hospital in Brooklyn. So back in 1942, my mother and father wanted to have him deliver me, so they took the D train to Brooklyn, and that's where I was born, and then they brought me back to the Bronx. So I basically was born in Brooklyn, although I never lived there. At 7 years old, which was the big thing in my life, my mother died. So from 7 years old, I was basically on my own.
Bobby, having read your book, there's something very interesting here. Your dad made dentures, and one of the people he made dentures for was Trotsky.
Yes.
Which is really kind of interesting. And I will add one note, don't misunderstand this. My grandmother slept with Trotsky. How about that?
Arthur, was he wearing his dentures when he did it?
That's a funny line. That was a funny line, Steve. My grandmother and Trotsky, and your dad and Trotsky. And quite interesting that Trotsky was living in the Bronx at that time.
Yes, it was like 1917, and Trotsky was, I believe, spent about four months or so in the Bronx. And I believe my father met him. There was a restaurant in the Bronx my father used to go to, and I think he met Trotsky at this restaurant. It was I can't remember the name, but it was a well-known restaurant. And through that meeting, Trotsky needed work done on his teeth, and my father was a young dental mechanic. My father actually was an orphan at 5 years old. He lived in a small town in Poland, and the Cossacks came in and on a pogrom and wiped out the whole village and took him as 5 years old and put him in a Polish orphanage. And the only thing good out of that, I guess, if there was anything good of that, they taught him a trade. They taught him how to be a dental mechanic, which was to make false teeth. And so when he was 17 years old and released from the orphanage, he immediately came to New York, and he had a practice in the Bronx. And so he hooked Trotsky up with a dentist, and the dentist took an implant and gave it to my father, and my father made whatever teeth, whether it's uppers or lowers or some portion of the mouth.
Which he was wearing, having read your book, which he was wearing when he was assassinated, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. He went down with my father's teeth in his mouth.
Wow. So I want to get to some interesting parts of the book that we could all talk about. And somehow,
absolutely,
you go from a kid in the Bronx who's gambling all the time, winning, losing, I'm sure that there's no such thing as a straight winner. and you get into the restaurant business and wind up having some of the hottest restaurants in New York. You became extremely successful. Now, while you were in high school, is it true that you knew Julian Schlossberg's mom, who was a teacher there, a guidance counselor?
A guidance counselor. And here's the story. It's funny. I haven't heard her name mentioned since I was in Taft High School, probably. When after my mother died, and we were all kind of, I was 7, and my we all lived in the same small apartment, and my father found an apartment on Morris Avenue and 172nd Street. It was a new building, at the time it was a new building, and it was 3 bedrooms, a nice sized apartment, and it was right across the street from Taft High School. But I mean, right across the street from the entrance to Taft High School on 172nd Street. So we moved into that apartment while I was in high school in Taft, and I came late every day if I went at all.
How'd you meet Julian's mother?
I'm going to get to that. So
Yeah.
I came late every day. And so being late every day, I was finally called into the guidance counselor. And your mother was sitting at a desk with her back to the window and looking. And I was sitting facing her, and I could see my building right across the street from where she sat. And she said, "What's the problem? Why are you always late? Do you have a problem at home? Where do you live?" And I said, "Right across the street." And that was it. She blew her top. she says, "You're late every day and you live right there." So that was, I don't know what she did after that, but that was my meeting with her, the guidance counselor. She didn't give me much guidance.
No, sounds like that. Well, she gave me more than enough. I wanted to ask you about the Army. You kind of joined at 17. Is that because we're both born in the Bronx? Well, I'm born in the Bronx, and you were born in Brooklyn, but we are a Bronx boy. I was born the same year you were, so we're absolutely that in common. But I'm interested in knowing, I joined the 6-month deal. Did you join the 6-month deal at
Yes.
17?
Yes. What happened was my father died the year I graduated from Taft High School. And so now it was just Florence, who was single at the time, and a school teacher. She took an apartment in Queens and took me under her wing and wanted me to stay with her. I just couldn't do it. I would take a subway back to the Bronx, go to the pool room, go with some girls that I knew, whatever, card games. And there was a weekend that I didn't tell her, where I was going or what I was doing, and I didn't call her or whatever. And she was in a state of panic, thinking I drove off a bridge somewhere, and I was dead also. She called the police. She called my brother. She called my cousins, the Cronishes in Brooklyn. I came home on a Sunday, and the police were there. Every relative I know was there, and she was like in a panic. And I knew I had to get out, so I enlisted in the Army. I also owed some money to the bookmaker. It's part and parcel. But anyway, I joined in the 6-month reserve outfit, the 310th Military Police Battalion. I did my 6 months and got out, and I took an apartment when I got out on Clark Place in the Bronx. So I had my own apartment when I was 17. And then I thought I had to do something with my life besides gamble, although I was still gambling. So I went to work. My brother owned a bar at the Stadium Motor Lodge, which was one exit from the Yankee Stadium, and a lot of the Yankee players stayed there. I learned how to be a bartender, whatever the case may be. But anyway, President Kennedy was in office at the time, and he had a face-off with Khrushchev over the Berlin. The tanks were facing each other in Berlin, and it was the Berlin crisis, and Kennedy called up the reserves, and I was in one of the units that were called back, and we got called back, and the only time a reserve outfit ever got called back was for war, Korean War. So we thought we were going to war. We actually flew out of LaGuardia with backpacks and rifles, but we flew to, and we didn't know where we were flying. We flew down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and we did. And what happened? We were an MP unit, and the MP outfit that patrolled the Fort Bragg flew to Paris to go to Germany, and we took over the post, the running of the post as an MP unit. And I didn't know when I was 17. And I didn't know when I was getting out. I didn't know if we were actually going to war. It was chaotic. I really didn't give a shit. So I just went about doing whatever I wanted. Normally, if it wasn't that time, and if it wasn't like a New York outfit, I probably would have been in the brig. But I didn't go. I didn't go to formation. I walked up and down the company streets by myself. Anyway, to make a long story short, myself and a couple of guys in that outfit, we wrote a show called The Second Time Around, based on the call up of the reserves. And I played a character, a sad sack soldier that wanted to go home. It was right around the holiday times for Christmas, and I wanted to go home for the holiday, and I did it, a takeoff on the poem. It was the night before Christmas. It was very successful. We did it for our a unit, and it became so popular. The Post newspaper gave us a big write up, and one thing led to another. We toured. We ended up touring every army base on the East Coast for a year doing this show. We did the show up until we got released in August. And I was a big star. And the New York Times magazine section gave us a 4-page write-up with pictures of me and, how brilliant I was.
You talked about the fact that you learned to be a bartender. How
Yes.
did you go from being a bartender to opening Samantha's, which I gather is named after your daughter, and that, if I remember, it was around 78th Street.
Correct. Yeah, I was working. From the time that I actually learned how to be a bartender and I worked as a bartender for many years. And I was married and had a child, Samantha. And one particular day, I was walking down I lived on 3rd, and I was walking down towards First Avenue, and I saw that there was a restaurant that was there. There were many restaurants that were there that went out of business, and this particular restaurant, the last one, was closed. It was a closed restaurant, and I looked at the closed restaurant on the corner of First Avenue and 78th Street, and I said, this would be a good spot for me to open a restaurant. And I knew the two guys that owned the restaurant, Joey Childs and Shelley Schuster. They were two Bronx guys that I met in the pool room when I was 13 years old. They were 10, 11 years older than me. And they were like hustlers, and they opened up bars and restaurants and sold them. And so I knew these guys, and I called up Joey Childs and met with them and told them I had an idea for their closed restaurant. And I didn't have any money at the time, and which is not uncommon. And we decided that we were going to. I pitched them an idea that I wanted to open a restaurant, but not a. At that time, and it was 1978. There was very few upscale or legitimate restaurants with full menus on the First Avenue. They were all bars and pubs serving, hamburgers and whatnot. I wanted to have a full-scale menu, and I pitched them the idea, and they said they liked it, and we decided we were going to go partners, a third, and they said more than likely it's going to take about $30,000 at that time to renovate. It was a fully built restaurant with a kitchen already, so 30,000, and they said we each have to put up $10,000, and I didn't have 10, but my wife had squirreled away $5,000 that she was afraid to let go, but she did. And I borrowed another $5,000 from two friends of mine, $2,500 each, and went into business with Joey and Shelley, and opened up Samantha Restaurant, and it was very successful. And it's a story in itself. It was I hired back then. There was no celebrity chefs. You know, if a guy could cook a hamburger on a grill, he was your chef. So I hired someone who had good credentials to be the chef, and I created the menu, and he made all of the dishes the way I wanted to. And I was very excited about the fact that I had a chef, and I hired wait staff, and I hired everybody, and I trained them. And the day of the opening, he didn't show up, and the sous chef, his cook, who I think lived with him, they didn't show up. This was the opening night, and people were coming in, and I wasn't smart enough to say we're not ready to open, and not. So I let everybody in, and what we did is we made spare ribs and chicken, and gave. It was like an open house. It was a great promotional, unexpected promotional event, and everybody that came, we fed chicken and ribs and gave them drinks, and the whole neighborhood heard about this. But I didn't know what I was going to do in terms of actually opening.
What happened to your guys? Why didn't they show?
I never found out. I never found out. Never heard from them. And this is before cell phones. So, you know, I would just call the number that I had, and nobody answered. And and what happened was there was a Chinese man that used to hang outside every day when I was building the restaurant. And I finally asked him if he wanted to come and help me, you know, get started working, you know, when I was ready to open. And I hired him as a maintenance guy and as a dishwasher. Anyway, so now at the end of the opening night, which was a big hit, but I didn't know what to do the next day, I'm sitting by myself at the bar having a scotch, and the Chinese guy, his name was Chang. I called him Mr. Chang. He said, he came over to me and he said, and we were the only two in the place where it was closed. He said, I got chef. I said, what do you mean? He said, I got chef. I bring chef tomorrow.
Was his initials PK?
PK me? No. Anyway, the next day comes. I said, yeah, bring him. Next day, he brings a young guy, a Chinese guy, a guy who was probably in his 30s, talked fluent English, and he says, I show him the menu. He tells me he's working somewhere in New Jersey at a restaurant. I said, you know, when can you start? He says, I can start right away. So I was desperate. I hired this guy. He didn't even ask me how much or anything. His name was Cherry. Cherry and Mr. Chang, they just came in the next day. They organized a kitchen. They put everything together. That Cherry became he was like a godsend. He made that a restaurant successful. I mean, I knew a lot of people came, but if I couldn't produce the product that we produced out of the kitchen, it would never have succeeded. And
so what was it, Bobby? What was it, like divine intervention? I mean,
it must have been. I swear to God, I have no idea. This Mr. Chang, every day he would lean against a car outside the restaurant, smoking one cigarette after another, never saying a word until I asked him. Yeah, and I'm telling you, this is like weeks went by. And I finally asked him if he wanted to come in and help me get organized. I needed a guy to help move
Almost sounds like he was an angel waiting to
Yes.
come in and help you out.
Well, actually, Arthur, let me ask a question. Did you have to add a Chinese dish to the menu, or was it all non-Chinese?
Non-Chinese. It was like my daughter used to call it like a country club menu. I did have like duck à l'orange. I had a chicken gizmondo dish. I made this menu after years of working in different places and picking up these items. But we would have 3 specials a day: a veal special, a fish special.
How many tables in the restaurant?
It sat. It was a small place. It sat 60 people, and then I had in the summer I had an outdoor cafe. So we sat
bar?
like 80 people, but I had a big bar.
Yeah,
a good sized bar. And I was
Bob. Let me ask you something that would I think our listeners would love to hear. How much business were you doing there every week? How much was coming in?
Back then, I have to tell you, I was doing $10,000 a week back in 1978. And if I tell you, my highest item might have been $6.95 for a chicken.
And your rent was $1,350, right?
Correct. It was $1,350 a month, and the woman. It was a building. It was a rent controlled or rent stabilized building that was built in the late 1800s, and a woman owned it. And the building was in her family from the very beginning. It was passed down to her. And she was an elderly woman, and she would come in on the beginning of every month to pick up the check for $1,350. I would have a check for her, and we'd sit and have a cup of tea, and we would chat. I said, I can mail you the check, or I could walk over. You don't have to come here. She said, no, I come. And I used to ask her every month, anytime you want to sell the building, we're willing to buy it. We'd like to buy the building. We were doing so well with the restaurant that we wanted to buy the building. Not that we wanted to, but I put it out there. After a couple of years, she came to me and said, she used to say to me, I'm going to leave this to my son. It's going to stay in the family. I said, okay. But after a couple of years, she came and she said, my son doesn't want the building. He wants the cash. And we made a deal. I bought the building for $560,000, $56,000 down. We bought the building.
Excuse me, Bobby, I'm sorry. Let's see if we can put this into perspective.
Go ahead.
You're a kid from the Bronx. You have a gambling habit, whatever you may say. It's if you're telling me that you were gambling, you probably were not making much money. Maybe you were breaking even, but you come up through the thing. You're an orphan from your mother and dad. When you're 16 years old, you go into the army, you're schlepping around, you're doing what you're doing. You're walking down the street one day, you see this place, you get involved, you buy it. This is an American dream story. And now you're making the restaurant's taking in 10 grand a week. You're paying $1,350 a month for rent.
Yes.
You're making a hell of a lot of money.
Right.
And so what was that like for you and your wife, having this kind of success at that time?
It was invigorating. It was exciting. It took the place of my having to gamble. This was my gamble. This was getting my juices flowing. When I gambled, it was really it would get my juices flowing. It was exciting gambling. Opening up a restaurant and doing well was that.
It was your action. You gave you action. Okay.
Gave me action. And so I was really on a high roll, and we decided I had a lot of people asking me, they wanted to invest in my next restaurant. and I found a place on Madison Avenue, and we opened up a place on Madison Avenue between 64th and 65th, called it Marigold. And at that time, I got into I had two partners, Joey and Shelley, and I couldn't get along with Shelley. Not that we didn't dissolve it. I stayed a partner, but I let the two of them run the restaurant, and I went on, and I made money from that restaurant without being there, and I was making money from the Samantha restaurant. It was still open, and then I opened up a place across the street from Lincoln Center. I was going to open a place with Eli Nastasi, who was at the time a top tennis player. I don't know if you remember the name.
Nasty,
of course.
Yes.
So I found Eli Nastasi. I played tennis at the East River Tennis Club, and the tennis pro there was Butch Seawagon. He was the number one tennis player in the city, and I used to play with. He would teach me and whatever, and and he played on the tour. He used to go to play on tournaments, and so he knew all the top players. And so he used to come into Samantha restaurant, and I found a spot on First Avenue. It was a restaurant that was failing. It was on 53rd Street and First, and I wanted to take. This is before I took the restaurant across the street from Lincoln Center, and I wanted to buy the restaurant and convert it into something where I would get a celebrity tennis player. And I pitched the idea to Butch, and he loved it. And I said, see if we can get Eli Nastasi. And he said, absolutely. And he hooked me up with Eli Nastasi. I met him, and charming guy. And, I said, you don't have to you have to put in $25,000 as just to put, to show good faith. And I forgot what the deal was, but he was going to get, for his $25,000, like 20% of the restaurant, where Butch and I were going to put in $150,000 for the balance. But he was going to, and he was going to lend his name to it. And he loved the idea. And for a whole month prior to me making the deal, we were going out every night, my wife and him, and everywhere we went, guys were coming over to him, women were jumping on him, and he was just a charming guy. Anyway, to make this story even longer, which I'm sorry to do, the day of the closing, where Butch, myself, and Eli were going to sign a contract and put the money up to make the deal, he reneged. He wanted not to put any money in and get the 20% or 25% that I was offering, and claimed that he had a manager that spoke on his behalf, and the manager said that Eli endorses things. He doesn't have to put money up. I said, yeah, but in this case, he already agreed to put the money up, and if he doesn't put the money, if I give it to him and he comes into this, his name may be well known, but if I run a place like shit, his name will be like shit. So I said, I'm not, I got really annoyed at him, and I said, forget it. And Butch and I went and we opened up Center Court, another tennis without Eli, across the street from Lincoln Center.
But Bob, when did you first? I think you told me that you once interviewed Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah,
and he didn't pass muster with you, and you said goodbye to Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, I was opening up a restaurant with Marla Maples when she was going through her divorce with Donald Trump. That was fun. And we were opening a restaurant on 63rd Street between 2nd and 3rd, and we were naming it Peaches. Anyway, we were getting to the point where I was hiring chefs, and I was interviewing chefs, and I got a call from a woman I know, and she said, I have a young man who's an excellent chef that I'd like you to interview. And he just got out of a rehabilitation. He was had a drug problem, and he just got out of rehabilitation. I said, okay, send him to me. And it was Anthony Bourdain before he was Anthony Bourdain, So he came, and I interviewed him, and I showed him the kitchen, and I showed him my menu that I wanted to do. And over a course of 2 days, I had conversations with him, and I decided not to hire him, not because of any reason. The only reason that I decided not to hire him is because I was interviewing somebody that I thought had better credentials and was working in a place that I knew, and it just made more sense. So I hired.
And he called you a knucklehead for the rest of your life. Right?
So when Anthony wrote a Kitchen Confidentials, he referred to me as Marla Maples' partner, the knucklehead. And he claimed in his book that he dumped the interview, that he didn't want to work there for me, which could be true. I don't know. And maybe
while you were partners with Marla Maples, did Donald rear his head?
Oh, yeah. So Marla, they were going through a terrible, terrible divorce. And Marla hated him. And the reason that she hated him, besides going through the divorce, they had a 5-year prenup arrangement that if they were to get divorced before the 5 years, she would end up with $1 million plus child support for Tiffany. And after 5 years, it would be much higher. And Donald managed to come in under the wire, under 5 years, to go through this divorce and putting her through a terrible time.
I can't imagine. What a shocking story.
Yeah, wait. So now we're opening up Peaches, and we got tremendous publicity because Marla was in the paper every day with this divorce. Marla would call me up every night, seriously, every night crying. That Donald promised me that he would give me more than $1 million. He's only given me $1 million. I said, Marla, you signed a prenup. Do you understand what that means? That you know who you're dealing with? You married him. So anyway, so now we have the opening night, invitation only. Anybody who was anybody was there. There were people outside, just gawking, people came to see who was there. The press was there. Entertainment Tonight came with their camera crew. Giuliani, when he was mayor, who was like a big shot at the time, he was there. Whoever was anybody was there. She didn't want Donald to come. So she said, I don't want him there. I'm not sending him an invitation. I said, fine. I don't do whatever you want. So now it's the opening night, and we had security outside, and Donald shows up. And the security don't want to let him in. And he's making a fuss. He's like a 2-year-old baby. He wants to come in. And now the security is calling me out. And Marla doesn't want him in. I said, Marla, let the baby in. The press is here. We'll get good press, take the high road. Let him in. So we let him in. And now Entertainment Tonight has the camera crew, and they grab him and Marla. And Tiffany was like 5 at the time, if I'm not mistaken.
What year was this?
I want to say it was 1998, 97, 98, something like that. Yeah, like that.
Bobby, in the real estate business, when you're buying property, it's location, location, location. In the restaurant business, how much of your success with your restaurants was where you place them? Was that the key?
No. Like I said, when I took Samantha, the corner on First Avenue and 78th Street, anybody who knew the area said, you got to be crazy taking that. 5 restaurants failed there. You got to be crazy. It didn't pay attention. When I took Mulholland Drive, which was a French restaurant, Le Cour Saint-Germain, that failed. the kid put in $2 million, wanted to put a French restaurant there. It failed. I bought it from him. And there's a story there, too, that I had to deal with his father. But that's besides the point. So it was on 3rd Avenue between 62nd and 63rd. Anybody said, you're on the wrong side of the street. That restaurant failed. They were telling me I was on the wrong side of the street because Bloomingdale's was on the west side of 3rd Avenue. These things meant nothing to me. So I opened a major success. Madison Avenue happened to be a great location, without question. And so was Lincoln Center, where we had Center Court. However, we had problems at Center Court, but I ended up selling it. I opened up 2020 with Ashford and Simpson on 20th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. When it was before it was became a popular area for restaurants. So no, I can't say. I'm not going to say that location isn't a key factor, but with me, it was always about having a hook. The celebrities were always a hook for me. Not at the beginning, but once I started to realize that a name associated with the restaurant that will get my name on Page 6 or Cindy Adams was a key element.
One of the things that I think we all find in business is that if you can develop a place, whether it's a restaurant, a movie theater, whatever it may be, and it's got a hook, it's got that great thing going, it got some extra jazz, it becomes a magnet. So even if you're in off location, people will find it and they will go to it. Bobby, we're running short on time. I need you to talk about the story that got you involved with Lois and that young actor who became a huge star and that went into Patrick Swayze and what have you, the thing with Travolta.
Okay. So when I, in my gambling days in my youth, when I was about 20 years old or thereabouts, and I needed to get out of New York for a while, and it was the summer, I took a job in Green Mansions, which was a resort in the Adirondacks. And in that resort, I took a job as a bartender. And in that resort, they had a theater group that would perform every week, different shows for the guests that were coming up. And in that theater group was Lois Zeta. But besides Lois Zeta was Madeline Kahn, which I had another story with, but I'll stick with Lois Zeta. Lois Zeta was an aspiring young actress, and I met her, and we got it on for the summer, and we were an item. And after the summer was over, we continued our romance. And she was the type of girl that would go on auditions and never get the part, or she would lose out. She would get down to final two, and the other person would get it. So Lois became a manager with Bob Lamond Zeta Management, but they had no clients, and they decided to go see a friend of theirs in a theater group in New Jersey playing Bye Bye Birdie in a restaurant theater type of thing. Anyway, after the show was over, they went backstage and to congratulate their friend. And Bob says to Lois, this little chubby kid over here who was in the chorus, I think he has something. Anyway, they approached the kid. They gave him the card. They said, if you're ever thinking of doing this professionally, give us a call. We're managers. And this kid was still in high school. So anyway, the kid said he was graduating soon. The kid calls him up a few weeks later. I would like to pursue this acting career. I'd like to meet with you. So Lois said to the kid, make sure you come with your mother. So they came, they signed him up, and the kid, they sent the kid out on a commercial. The kid gets the commercial. They sent him out on three things. He went 3 for 3, like Willie Mays. And the kid was John Travolta. So this is their first client that they signed, John Travolta. And for that, they became major players managing major talent, and one of their players were Patrick Swayze, amongst others. But John Travolta wanted, after he did Urban Cowboy, he did a Saturday Night Fever. He had a 3-picture deal with Paramount, and he did Urban Cowboy, and they were trying to think of what the next movie was going to be. And I had made little tapes, vignettes of stories of me growing up in the pool room days, hustling, and with the Damon Runyon character. So I had all these stories on tape, and I gave it to Lois, and Lois gave it to John, and John loved it. He wanted to meet me, which we did, and they wanted to develop it into a movie, and it was going to be called The Bronx Bastard, because Lois used to call me the Bronx Bastard for various reasons. But anyway, John, so I met with John. We flew to, I met him out in LA. We went to a restaurant, and I pitched him the idea of this. He liked the character because it reminded him of the character he played in Saturday Night Fever, Brooklyn Kid, Street Kid. So I was this similar character in some respects. And so I was flying out there constantly. We were trying to develop it into a movie, which never happened. But John did say to me that, if this ever gets into a movie, I want to play your part. But
so let me be only under the heading of time, Bobby.
Sure.
Let me just say that you go on from that meeting, but with Lois, and you get involved with a restaurant with Patrick Swayze. You have a big success.
Yes.
You then go into a restaurant with Britney Spears, and you get involved with her father and I think her mom and her dad and what have you.
Yes.
And again, you have nothing but success. We're going to have to do another show to find out with this part of your book that talks about going to Humble Pie, because you had enormous success with these restaurants.
Yes.
And the question would become for part 2 when we do it, what happened beyond that point? What got you to Humble Pie? Because God knows you made it. You got to be making all kinds of money and fame.
Yes.
Fame.
Yes.
And you were involved with all the biggies. So we'll talk about that the next time out. But we're getting cues here from our producer Mike that we're running out of time. And so, Mike, I want Bobby. Let's pass it on to Mike. You've been a great guest. We'll have fun.
Thank
Michael.
you, Bobby. You've been great. It's great stories.
I'll be happy to come back anytime you want me.
Okay.
We appreciate you. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could also find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you could even find us up on our YouTube page. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. If you're into social media, please check us out over on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's going on their shows this week. Julian, who you talking to this week?
Award-winning actress and producer Sarah Jessica Parker, and we're going to hear an awful lot about Sex and the City, but many other things. This young woman is involved in book publishing, in fragrances, in all kinds of things. She's become her own little corporation. That's Sarah Jessica Parker.
Awesome. And Steve, do you have your show up and running now that the fires have died out?
Yes, thank God. We're safe. Our house is safe. We're back talking about the career of Errol Flynn, our third visit with author Robert Florczak, who called in from Germany. We talk about the final decade of Errol Flynn, the 1950s. He passed away in 1959, so we talk about films like The Sun Also Rises and Cuban Rebel Girls, which was his very last film. Fascinating material.
And also known in Hollywood as the King of Stuppers.
and the expression, In like
In
Flint.
like
In like
Flint.
Flint, yes,
Of
sir.
course, of course.
Thank you so much, everybody. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We'll see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Let's get spooky. If you crave all things horror, it's time to check out Earth Station Boo. Join the haunted host as we dive into the dark corners of the world of horror. From iconic monsters, chilling movies, books, and shows, to spine-tingling nuance and the haunting history behind it all, we leave no gravestone unturned. So come, horrorholics, and join us wherever you listen to podcasts, because we know you're just dying to listen.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.